most, if not all, I hope, know them from their having been here before. Pat Lamanna has been writing and performing songs all her adult life. Her songs have been praised highly by Pete Steeper, Peter Euro, and others. They have a strong folk influence and cover issues such as peace, religion, and the environment. Pat was Sunny Oaks, picked to perform in the Folk DJ Showcase at the 2012 Conference of the Northeast Regional Folk Alliance, and one of her songs, Peace Pilgrim, is featured in part on Pete Seeger's albums, Full Circle, Do I Know My Song Well Enough to Start Singing Yet? And Something Beautiful in 2017. And there's a link where you can purchase that, that's listed online. She's also a 2019 winner of the South Florida Folk Festival Songwriting Contest. Richard goes with her and is helping her always. From what I've noticed, they perform at the Folk, Midhudson Folk Guild. So I've heard them there too, and it's delightful. Pat and Richard joined the Living Legacy Pilgrimage Tour of historic civil rights landmarks in and around Memphis, Tennessee, and Jackson, Mississippi last October. But the experience moved, informed, and often surprised them, and they're going to share these experiences in a multimedia presentation. Welcome.
Third slide. The Living Legacy Pilgrimage is a journey to meet the people, hear the stories, and visit the sites that changed the world during the Civil Rights Movement. Pat and I made this journey last October. We traveled by bus to sites in Memphis, Tennessee, and then around Jackson, Mississippi. We traveled with about 35 other pilgrims, many of them UUs, but people of other faiths as well. We had three tour leaders, and we had a bus driver that was actually more of a tour guide than a bus driver. Our tour leaders were the well-known folk singer Reggie Harris, the retired UU minister Gordon Gibson, who had been active in the civil rights movement in the South during the 60s, and Annette Marquez, who managed the logistics of the journey very competently and efficiently. On the right is the bus driver, that's our friend Clarence Jones. The tour leaders divided us into, quote, touchstone groups, end quote, which met periodically throughout the tour to process so that we could process our experiences and our reactions. We took this journey because we wanted to see with our own eyes the places we had read and heard about for decades. We also knew that the tour leaders had special insights into the events and would introduce us to other people who had lived these events and could tell us about them firsthand. We include this slide for orientation. We landed in Memphis, went to Glendora, on to Philadelphia, to Jackson, and finally to Hattiesburg, before returning to Memphis. This is the order in which we experienced the sites.
We present to you some of the highlights of that journey, but not in the order in which we visited them, but chronologically in the order in which the events took place some 60 plus years ago. So those who may be less familiar with the events and individual events can put them into context. We'll also tell you about some events and individuals whom we have never learned about. They are not part of the traditional narrative of the civil rights movement, but they should be. We hope that you will take this new information and share it with others, as well as gaining a deeper knowledge about the better known events and people. Next slide, please. We begin in 1955 with a seminal event in the history of the civil rights movement. Most of you probably know the story of Emmett Till, the 14-year-old Black boy from Chicago who was visiting with family in Money, Mississippi, which was on the map. But we actually didn't visit it. when he reportedly whistled at a white woman. By the way, we highly recommend the movie Till. Has anyone seen that movie, Till? Very fine movie, and it seems to be fairly accurate. Excuse me. A few days after the whistling incident, Emmett was taken from his great uncle's home late at night and brought to this place in Glendora, Mississippi, where he was beaten and tortured by the woman's husband and his half-brother. Emmett's body was found in the Tallahatchie River 3 days later. His mother insisted that the coffin be opened and pictures taken, so all the world could see the violence and brutality inflicted on Black people in Mississippi. The sympathy and outrage provoked by those images helped to spawn the civil rights movement. The two men, acquitted of all charges, sold their story to Look magazine for $4,000. They knew they could not be tried again for the same crime, so they described in detail exactly how they planned to execute the murder. Next slide, please. Okay. Here we see Reggie Harris, our wonderful folk singer. I think some of you probably know him, and our tour leader on the left. On the right is Johnny Thomas, mayor of Glendora, Mississippi, population roughly 100. Johnny was largely responsible about 17 years ago for putting together the museum housed in the building behind him, with the picture of Emmett Till on the building. Johnny also told us that his father and another Black man were forced to assist in the murder of Emmett Till. Afterward, his father had to flee the county, returning to visit once a year. Next slide, please.
Pat, speak closer to the microphone.
Which one? I guess this one will do.
Or we can move this one over. Use this.
Well,
I think it's okay.
I think it's
it's
fine.
gonna be a
I think
little
it's
too
fine.
complicated with
It's
Richard-
fine.
Richard
Mike,
Harris talking.
Okay.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Closer
Okay.
you get to that.
So here is a picture of our group taken outside the Emmett Till Historic Intrepid Center, also called EPIC building. Next slide, please.
At the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, we met Hezekiah Watkins. In 1961, when Hezekiah was 13 years old, he and a friend went to a Greyhound bus station to see a group of Freedom Riders. Now, Freedom Riders were groups of whites and African American civil rights activists who participated in freedom rides, the bus trips through the South in 1961 and 60. In the South in 1961 to protest segregated bus terminals. The Freedom Riders sought to test a 1960 decision by the Supreme Court that segregation of interstate transportation facilities included bus terminals, and it was unconstitutional. Freedom Riders tried to use whites-only restrooms and lunch counters at bus stations in southern states. Along the routes, the groups were confronted by arresting police officers as well as experiencing horrific violence from white protesters. You may have heard the late Congressman John Lewis speak of how badly he was beaten during his days as a freedom rider. Now, Hezekiah's friend pushed Hezekiah into the bus station, where he was then arrested with a group of freedom riders. This young teen was sent to the famous Parchman Penitentiary, where he stayed for 5 days until his wife and his mother got a phone call to come and get him. She thought for sure she'd be picking up his body. She was grateful to find that he was alive, but he declared that he must never get involved in such activities again. She later relented and supported him through his activism, but at personal great sacrifices. Her house was shot into, she lost her job. Hezekiah has been arrested, this gentleman here has been arrested 109 times and has shared a jail cell with Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and other luminaries. He now works at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, telling his story to tourists, school groups, and anyone else who will listen to it. Next slide. This bus is from the era of the early 1960s, but it's not the actual bus that was ambushed and attacked on May 14, 1961. Now, when the National Civil Rights Museum was preparing to open in 1991, they had a controlled burn of this bus to make it appear like the actual bus. You can see the terrible damage.
The Council of Federated Organizations, also known as COFO, was a coalition of national and regional organizations engaged in civil rights activities in Mississippi. It was established in 1961 with the goal of maximizing the efforts of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. One of COFO's efforts in Mississippi was the fall 1963 Freedom Vote, a mock election held to protest the mass disenfranchisement of Black citizens of the state. I'm just going to sing you a little bit of a couple of the many songs that were sung by the civil rights activists in those states. And some of you may know those songs, sing along if you do. If you're on Zoom, sing along, please mute yourself. I ain't scared of your jail, cause I want my freedom, want my freedom, want my freedom. I ain't scared of your jail, cause I want my freedom, want my freedom now. I ain't scared of your dogs, cause I want my freedom, want my freedom, want my freedom. I ain't scared of your dogs, cause I want my freedom, I want my freedom now. If you miss me from the back of the bus and you can't find me nowhere, come on over to the front of the bus. I'll be right there. I'll be right there. I'll be right there. Come on over to the front of the bus. I'll be right there. If you miss me from the cotton fields, you can't find me nowhere. Come on over to the courthouse. I'll be going right there. I'll be going right there. I'll be going right there. Come on over to the courthouse. I'll be going right there. Next slide, please.
Medgar and Murley Evers moved into this home in 1955 after Medgar, a decorated World War II combat veteran, became the NAACP's first Mississippi field secretary. Now, he was an outspoken activist for voter registration and social justice. Evers was assassinated in his own driveway on June 12, 1963, as he returned from a meeting. Do you notice anything unusual about this house? Take a peek at it. When the house was built, the Everses instructed the builders not to put a front door on the house. They thought it would deter acts like the one that eventually took Medgar's life. The house now belongs to Tougaloo College and is a historic house museum. We were not able to enter, but we walked around outside. I gotta go off script here. I'm kind of interested myself in what I say at this point. While everyone else was wandering around and looking at the plaques and the children's playground equipment in the backyard and the other pictures on the wall, I'd already studied the pictures on the wall in the breezeway. So I saw where the bullet went through the window. And I saw where the bullet hit the refrigerator. A nice dent in the refrigerator. And I saw on the countertop where the bullet rolled and just lay. After it passed through the man. So I, sort of engineer scientist as I am, I started kind of lining stuff up and walking around and figured he probably had to be away from the house in some fashion until I finally This is probably it, folks. This is where Medgar Evers was unloading the t-shirts out of the back of his car when the bullet passed through him. So I lined all this up. This is probably where the man held the weapon up, pulled the trigger. And at this moment, I'm so clearly remember this moment that it occurred to me. It's like a big veil came over me, like a big dome just sort of enclosed me. And all that rattled around inside my head was, how can someone hate so much as to do this? How can someone hate so much?
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. Gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Next slide, please. Next slide. That's it. Building on the success of the 1963 Freedom Vote, HOFO organized Mississippi Freedom Summer in 1964, which brought hundreds of northern college students to the state to assist HOFO in registering voters. This song by Phil Oakes, that's the brother of Sonny Oakes, reflects the spirit of those young freedom fighters. I'm going down to Mississippi. I'm going down that freedom road. And if you never see me again, remember that I had to go. Remember that I had to go. The project opened on a tragic note when 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman, disappeared in late June 1964. They had been investigating the burning of the Mount Zion United Methodist Church in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and the beatings of its members. They were found murdered in early August. This monument is on the grounds of that church that was rebuilt in 1965. Next slide. Inside the church, we met the pastor, Eddie Hinton, his wife, Darlene, and Jewel Rush McDonald on the right. Jewel told us that her mother and brother had been beaten at the church that night before it was burned to the ground. Andrew Goodman came to her house to ask them about the beatings. A deputy sheriff later arrested Goodman, Chaney, and Schwerner on a traffic charge to keep them locked up while the Klan could assemble. Edgar Ray Killen, a minister and a Klansman, informed the Klan when the men were released so they could ambush them. In 1967, after the state government refused to prosecute, the federal government charged 18 individuals. 7 were convicted and received relatively minor sentences. 41 years later, after the murders took place, Edgar Ray Killen was charged by the state of Mississippi for his part in the crimes. In 2005, he was convicted of 3 counts of manslaughter and given a 16-year sentence. Killen died in prison in January 2018.
This is James Chaney's grave marker in Meridian. Note the steel reinforcements. The gravestone has been vandalized numerous times. At the gravesite, we met Chaney's daughter, Angela Lewis, and her grandson. She gave an inspiring talk, and Reverend Gordon Gibson is there standing next to her. Oh yes, it was her great-grandson. I just need to read the script. At some point during one of the long bus rides, Gordon told us a joke that he was told by the civil rights worker.
A Harvard University seminary student was fast asleep one night when he was awakened by a voice saying,
Go to Mississippi, set my people free.
the student was frightened, but said, Lord, I still have to finish my degree work here. Again, the voice said,
Go to Mississippi and set my people free.
the student protested, but Lord, it's dangerous down there. And the voice said,
Do not be afraid, my child. I will be with you as far as Memphis.
at this location, we heard a story that I don't believe any of us knew anything about. The home and a roadside store belonging to one Vernon Damer once stood here. Vernon was a successful farmer and businessman and an active member of the NAACP in Hattiesburg. His motto was, if you don't vote, you don't count. On January 10th, 1966, his home was firebombed. While he fought the assailants, his family was able to escape, but he died, and his house and the store burned to the ground. Funds were raised to build a fine brick home on the site, and his widow, age 99, still lives there. One of the lawyers who helped bring some of the attackers to justice was Bob Helfrich, who was running for circuit court judge at the time of our visit, hence the campaign sign next to the historical marker. These are some of Vernon Damer's descendants. His son Harold on the left, then Harold's daughter, Harold's great-granddaughter and granddaughter, and his brother Dennis. Dennis is a successful businessman in the New Orleans area, but he comes home frequently to check on the family's business and on his mother. Here, Vernon's widow, Ellie, chats with Gordon Gibson and our tour coordinator, Ned Mattocks.
Here's another story that we knew nothing about before our trip. This picture was taken in the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. Julius Rosenwald was CEO of the Sears Roebuck Company and a fabulously wealthy man. He was also Jewish. In 1911, he said, quote, the horrors that are due to race prejudice come home to the Jews more forcefully than to other of the white race, on account of the centuries of persecution which they have suffered and still suffer. End quote. Many of his philanthropic endeavors were directed towards the betterment of conditions for Black people. They included a collaboration with Booker T. Washington, then president of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, to build schools for children, first in Alabama and then throughout the South. As you know, schools in the South were segregated, and schools for Black children were far inferior to those of whites. By the end of the project in the 1930s, Rosenwald had helped to fund over 5,000 schools for Black children in 15 states. The grants required matching funds from the communities. The local African American communities with their white school district each had to match the amount of the grant from the Rosenwald Fund. Rosenwald required the match to encourage communities to work together in building the schools. Some community members contributed building materials and labor for their match. Black communities often had fish fries, bake sales, and other events to raise money. This is the Bay Spring Rosenwald School. The Damer family donated land for a Rosenwald school to be built in their community. Dennis Damer's mother, Ellie, was a school teacher here. His aunt was a head mistress. The school was closed in 1958 after the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court justice struck down segregation in public schools. Dennis, who was born in 1954, was too young to attend this school, but his older siblings did. Like many of the Roosevelt schools, this one became a community meeting place for many years after it was no longer used as a school. It is now more or less a museum with pictures and information about the school's history. Dennis brought us to the schoolhouse and explained its history to us in the classroom. There's currently a movement to turn some of these schoolhouses into a non-contiguous national park. The park's headquarters would be in Chicago, where Roosevelt lived, and about 5 Roosevelt schools in different locations would be chosen to tell the story of the Roosevelt schools. Dennis is, of course, hoping that the Bay Springs School will be one of those chosen.
Now we are in Memphis. You may recognize this location. It is the Lorraine Motel where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. It is now the National Civil Rights Museum. The rooms where King and his entourage stayed are preserved as they looked at the time. But the rest of the building, and one across the street, house exhibits highlighting important events and people in the civil rights movement. Here is a view of the balcony where Dr. King stood on the last night of his life. The wreath marks the spot where he was standing. It was a solemn moment for us to be in that place. This was actually the first stop on our tour, but it belongs at the end of our presentation because it was here that we met Marquita Bradshaw, who brought us up to date on the new civil rights struggles of the 21st century. On the first evening of our tour, we were brought here to the beautiful UU Church of the River in Memphis, with views of the mighty Mississippi through the windows. After a sumptuous southern dinner, with collards, macaroni and cheese, etc., Reggie led us in song. Oh, here we go, yes. Then Marquita spoke to us about her successful fight to rid South Memphis of pollutants that are causing numerous cancers, including in children. She ran for US Senate in 2020, an unlikely candidate as a young Black woman with no legislative experience, and won 35% of the vote. She continues to fight for environmental justice, one of the major struggles that is taking place in the South today, well, actually, all over the country today. Now that lunch counters in schools are desegregated and Blacks can usually vote without fearing to lose their lives.
We thought including the map now might aid you in remembering some of the questions you wanted to ask. After the closing song, we'll have a question and answer period. On our last day, we gathered in a park and reflected on our experience, and we sang. We had stood in the places where history was made, learned new things, and met some amazing people. Through our touchstone groups, we had gotten to know some of our group's members, examined our own feelings, and made plans to bring to others what we had experienced and felt, which is exactly what we're doing right now, and sharing these experiences with you. Of course, as we sang, you undoubtedly know what song we sang. Please sing it with us now.
Great. Stand up. Right here. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Only in my heart, I still believe that we shall overcome someday.
shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. Oh, live in our hearts. We shall overcome someday. That's it. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I still believe that we shall overcome someday.
Discussion, I should have.
So do we have time
Yeah.
for a couple of questions, comments?
Sure.
Or-